these people are headed towards the coast a little bit further inward. Now, part of the problem is much of Gaza has been decimated, so there isn't a significant area for this many people to go, which is why there's so many concerns from humanitarian organizations about displacing this population from Rafah.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, walk us through this latest controversy with Israel and the International Criminal Court.
Earlier this week, the ICC announced that they were seeking arrest warrants. Now it's not quite having issued arrest warrants, but there's an application process that they're now going through, where a panel of judges are overlooking it to determine whether or not they should proceed. But they are seeking arrest warrants for two Israeli leaders, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Now they also issued or said they were seeking arrest warrants for three Hamas leaders, two of whom are believed to be in Gaza, one of whom is seen as more of a political figure that's not based in Gaza. Israel, as was expected, was very angry that this happened. Prime Minister Netanyahu called it anti-Semitic. He said it fundamentally compared or provided some sort of moral comparison to what
Your equivalency between
Israel and Hamas. And that's also a sentiment that we heard a lot from members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans. And their argument is Hamas is a terrorist organization that went into Israel and killed roughly 1,200 people, took about 250 more hostage, whereas Israel is now included by a democratically elected government, is now responding to that act of terrorism. And so we've heard from members of Congress and the administration that they're open to sanctioning the ICC or ICC officials or many other avenues, but it does seem like there will be a U.S. response to this.
And the White House, which hasn't always seen eye to eye with the Netanyahu government, has also been fairly critical of this move.
That's exactly right. They have said, number one, they don't believe that there's a moral equivalence between Israeli leaders and Hamas leaders, but they've also said that they don't believe the ICC has jurisdiction in this.
So there has been tension over the offensive in Rafah that the Israeli government wants to do. Some of those may have cooled in recent days. What's the current state of play there?
So Israel is carrying out limited operations or precise operations in Rafah. They've urged hundreds of thousands of people to leave Rafah, and we've seen even more than have been asked to leave actually leave. We've seen, according to the UN, roughly 800,000 people who were sheltering in Rafah leave, and these people are headed towards the coast a little bit further inward. Now, part of the problem is much of Gaza has been decimated, so there isn't a significant area for this many people to go, which is why there's so many concerns from humanitarian organizations about displacing this population from Rafah.
So there's this pier that's been constructed that's supposed to facilitate the transport of humanitarian aid into Gaza. There's been some criticism as to whether that's gone as well as had been hoped for. What's the current status there?
So it was definitely there were definitely some hurdles that they ran into in their first couple days. Number one, the amount of aid that was traveling from Cyprus to the pier and onto Gaza's shores was less than they had anticipated, even for the start. And DoD officials said that this would be a process where they would start small and slowly accumulate more and more, and yet they still came in at the start under those expectations. So that's number one. Number two, what has always been the biggest concern was whether the international humanitarian organizations within Gaza would have the ability and success in distributing this aid throughout the Gaza Strip to the communities who most need it. And that hasn't really happened in the early onset of this project since the pier opened. We saw several trucks get commandeered, not even by Hamas, but by desperate civilians whom the aid wasn't necessarily intended for, just sort of overpower trucks and take aid off them. And it shows the level of desperation that many Palestinians are facing, and yet it also represents one of the big concerns that is now born a reality, as opposed to what had been thought of as a potential concern.
Sure. I mean, so there's concern more broadly, apart from the pier, about whether aid that's being distributed in Gaza is actually getting to the intended beneficiaries.
That's exactly right, and that's been a concern that's been ongoing for several months, and it is very difficult. There is not a lot of governing going on, especially in northern Gaza, where most Palestinians were urged to leave, but there's still a couple 100,000 there, and they don't have access to the humanitarian supplies that they need, and they are, relying on these humanitarian institutions that are now, to some extent, not meeting those objectives.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.